I had a few very unpleasant experiences growing up in Egypt. For those who don't know, this is the Coptic cross. It's a marking of faith that Coptic Christians have from a very young age. I had this cross when I was 12 years old, I believe. There was one time actually my mom sent me to buy a bag of rice. The guy gave me the bag of rice, and then after I handed the money, he looked at my wrist, looked back at me, snatched the rice bag off my hand, and I said, "We don't have any." Like, what? He just gave it to me. Yeah, go to your mom and say that we don't have any. So experiences like this went on and on.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. With me today is Adam Elmasri. Adam is an Egyptian Australian who grew up in Egypt as an orthodox Coptic Christian. He's now a religious critic and supporter of LGBT and women's rights in the Middle East. Adam has written 2 books, How Did Christianity Begin Really? And Wounded by Faith. Marhaban, ya Adam. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast.
Thank you, Yasmine. It's lovely to be here with you.
It's lovely for you to be here with me. I came on your podcast a few years ago and I didn't have a podcast at the time. So it's really nice that I can finally, return the favor. And I'm really interested in hearing your story. You were really great, like very gracious having me on your podcast and listening to me tell you all about my story. So now I want to hear all about you. I want to hear about you being born and raised in Cairo as a Coptic Christian. So we hear a lot of things about Christians in Egypt, and I'd like to hear your perspective. So, what was it like for you living as a minority Christian in a majority Muslim country? How did it shape the Adam who you are today?
Massively. Um, I was privileged because I grew up in Cairo, Egypt. So if I cannot speak for all Christians of Egypt, of course, because if you were born and raised in Upper Egypt in one of Muhafadat al-Rif, the countryside of Egypt, you would have witnessed a completely different experience. But I was born in Cairo, raised in Cairo. I went to a Catholic school. So in a lot of sense, I was really sheltered in a way. Um, from a very young age, I was entrenched in the church. Um, I went to Sunday school. My parents used to take us every Sunday to attend the church service. Um, I hardly had any Muslim friends growing up, and of course, because I went to a Catholic school, I still the majority of my friends were Christian, so I was kind of isolated to a great extent. I'm not sure if I should classify this as positive or negative, because on one hand, yes, I was sheltered. I stayed with the Christian community, but on the other hand, that created a very strong sense of identity, um, because I wasn't exposed to the other point of view, or to not sure how I word it, but yes, I was cocooned in a way. I'm not sure if that makes any sense.
It does. I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, how are you cocooned in a country that is like 90% Muslim? Because when I lived in Egypt, like you can't escape it. The adhan is going 5 times a day. Every channel you turn on, every masrahiyya, everything is about Islam. Like it's
In your
constant, like
face.
in your face everywhere. I know you weren't getting it in school, but you were getting it in the marketplace, you were getting it in media, you were getting it, I'm sure, in like everywhere you went, restaurants, stores, any interaction that you had. So I don't know how cocooned you could possibly be. I'm just reminded of a story of an Egyptian Christian friend of mine who was telling me when she was 10 years old, she could hear the khutbah, which is the sermon on Fridays, where they were cursing the Christians and the Jews. And she's like, yeah, mama, does that mean us or do they hate us? You know? So as a 10-year-old to hear this in the streets of the city that you live in. So I'm just wondering, A, how were you cocooned? Like you must have had some interactions. Um, and then B, I want to go back to what you said about Upper Egypt, which is actually like the southern part of Egypt, and the villages there, and the Christians that live in those villages, and how their lives were so different from yours. So I want to dig a little deeper in that, where you could talk to us about you being privileged in Cairo, but what was it like for the other Christians in Egypt? So two big questions for you, Adam.
Totally. So when I said cocooned, I meant in the social sense. So I never had um, social life or friends in the Muslim community. But as you said, you cannot be completely sheltered from it because it is right in your face. Um, in Egypt, for instance, you would be watching your favorite TV show, and instead of the commercial breaks, the TV show will be interrupted because you have the adhan, the call for prayers, and
Exactly.
that happens 5 times a day. Very frustrating. Well, I get it for Muslims, okay, that's a prayer reminder, but for someone who had nothing to do with this, it was frustrating, at least as a kid. Then yes, you go to the shops. I had a massive mosque in our square. We had the mosque having a massive speaker right next to our balcony. So every time the adhan went on, it was pretty much in my bedroom. So in that sense, yes, I wasn't cocooned. I wasn't sheltered at all. It was rubbed in my face all the time. Also, for a lot of people, to understand that when when you grow up in Egypt and study your school curriculum, and the only way to study Arabic as a subject is by studying the Quran. In the same sense that when you study English as a subject, you study Shakespeare and Charles Dickens as literature. In Arabic, you study the Quran and you have to memorize chunks of it, regardless of your personal faith. So even though I was born and raised cocooned Christian, I still had massive exposure and forced down my throat that I have to memorize the Quran and understand its meanings and all that. Um, so yeah. Now I had a few very unpleasant experiences growing up in Egypt. And I'm not sure if it's too early to talk about now. Once I had the tattoo cross on my hand, which is for those who don't know, this is the Coptic cross. It's a marking of faith that Coptic Christians have from a very young age. I had this cross when I was 12 years old, I believe. Um, and it's a faith declaration for a lot of Coptic Christians. Now, once you have this cross on you, there is no escape. I had all sorts of terrible things that happened to me growing up there, from buying stuff in the shop and handing the money to the cashier. And after
Mm.
there was one time actually my mom sent me to buy a bag of rice, and the cross was fresh. I think I had it about a week or two. So I went to that store and I handed the guy the guy gave me the bag of rice. And then after I handed the money, he looked at my wrist, my hand, looked back at me, snatched the rice bag off my hand again, and he said, "We don't have any." Like, what? You just gave it to me. Is Yeah, go to your mom and say that we don't have any. So experiences like this went on and on. Um, and I guess that feeds or fed into the sense of identity. Well, okay, now that I have the cross on my wrist, I guess I will be persecuted for the rest of my life. There have been instances where I was rejected job interviews as a young adult, um, all sorts of different things. So that's about me growing up as a Christian in
That's the privileged person in
the
Egypt.
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, all what I said here, that's the privileged version growing up in Cairo. Because if I would have been born and raised in Upper Egypt, it would have been a lot worse. I mean, these people fear for their lives on a daily basis. Um, it takes it takes 5 minutes to spark a massive fight that you will find firearms and massive clashes between Christians and Muslims in these areas, and churches burnt down, and all sorts of horrible things that you can imagine. Um, it goes beyond the persecution in the sense of the annoyance or the bureaucracy that you may face on the in Upper Egypt. You really fear for your life because you fear physical harm. You fear being attacked on the road just because you're a Christian. Um, so yeah.
Unbelievable. Because there's a lot of Egyptian people who, whenever I speak about the persecution of Christians in Egypt, they just want to shut me up. They're like, no, 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 no. It's not like that at all. They live equally to the rest of us. Nobody is persecuted. These are just extreme circumstances that you're bringing up. This is not how it is. I lived in Egypt for a few years and I know that's how it was. That was my experience. That's what I saw. That's what, that's what I know. Um, and I feel that which is not just Egyptians, this is throughout the Arab world, they have this inability to do any kind of self-reflection. In fact, they have a resistance to any kind of self-reflection. And if you're unwilling to admit that you have a problem, then how would you ever even begin to start to deal with it, to start to solve it, And so it's so frustrating to me how you don't hear enough stories of what you're telling me now, Adam. You don't hear enough Christian Egyptians speaking up even. And now I don't know if that has to do with because they're very nationalistic, because obviously they love Egypt very much, and it's part of the Egyptian culture to not want, fadayah. You don't want to embarrass your country by telling the world, that you guys have a problem with bigotry, with religious bigotry. So is that why they're not speaking up, or is it out of fear? Like I feel like there should be more advocacy, more education, more just awareness, because we're talking about a small percent of the population, and most people are living in their bubbles, unaware that this is life for Christians in Egypt.
Totally. Well, to be honest, it's multifaceted problem, and all the things that you mentioned are true. Part of the problem is, yes, some of them are very nationalists and they don't want to put their dirty laundry in front of the world. Now we're good. Some of them don't talk about it out of fear, because if we start talking about it and we're just 10% in front of 90%, we will suffer even more. So how about we just pretend that it's not happening, and out of sight, out of mind, and hopefully they will look after us better. Part of the problem is that it also depends on where you grow up and where you live most of your life. It really, the suburb that you live most of your time is makes a huge difference. If you're born in Shubra, for instance, which is a suburb dominated by, it's about the only suburb dominated by Christians in Cairo, then yes, you will have a more tolerable version, and because you're living among your majority, not minority in that sense. But then you step out of Shubra and go to any other place in Cairo, and then you will witness these kind of experiences for all these different. And I have to say that it wasn't all doom and gloom. I of course I had some beautiful Muslims who helped me throughout my life. It wasn't like all Muslims were against me or against my family. Um, but yeah, if you put things in perspective, I understand why a lot of people don't talk about it. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening, and it's happening a
Mhm.
lot. Um, So yeah.
Yeah. I just wish that I don't want to call Egyptians Arab, but that whole Middle Eastern world of Arabs and Muslims, North Africa, that whole kind of area, I just wish they would be more comfortable with soul searching. I wish that they could be more comfortable with admitting that there are problems so that we can begin to solve them, so that we can begin to progress as societies. But that this resistance they have to any kind of admission of anything negative is so counterproductive and so frustrating to me. Um, but anyway, I'm sure you know exactly what I mean and you feel the same frustration.
Totally.
So let's talk a little bit about this intersection between religion and culture, because Egyptians, as we both mentioned, are very proud people. Whether you're a Christian or whether you're Muslim, you're a very proud Egyptian. And obviously, there's going to be um, I guess there's going to be an intersection between the culture and the religion, right? So even though the religions are different, there's going to be a lot of cultural aspects that are very similar. In your book, you talked about your mom having to undergo FGM, which is unfortunately very common in Egypt. It's now been criminalized, but unfortunately it still happens. That's something that's in the scripture of Islam. So that's part of the Islamic faith. Is it part of the Christian faith? And if not, then did this happen to your mom because of the fact that she was living in this culture? Like, can you just talk to me a little bit about um, that connection between culture and religion and growing up in that?
Yep. So FGM precedes both Christianity and Islam. It's an ancient, horrible tradition. Some scholars say that it originated in Egypt with male circumcision as well. Um, some um, some historians put it outside of Egypt, but history is history. At some point, Islam endorsed FGM within the Hadith and the Sunnah,
Mhm.
while Christianity never endorsed it. So Christianity only embraced circumcision as a Jewish tradition. And at some point, it wasn't even mandatory. Male circumcision is not needed anymore in the Christian world. That said, FGM is not a Christian practice. It's not endorsed. It's not sought after. But because, as you said earlier, it's a heavily practiced tradition in Egypt still, and it's praised by the Muslim scriptures. It happens a lot. Back in the days when mom was born, and it wasn't only mom and her three sisters, three of my aunties experienced FGM. In her village, FGM wasn't even done by a medical practitioner. You just go to an uneducated midwife that basically uses a blade, and it's done in a filthy room. Like a lot of people get infected and die during these process, bleeding. It's unspeakable horrors, really. But when you grow in a mom was born and raised in a very poor village in Egypt, where there's hardly any education in this area. So both grandparents, both mom's mom and mom's dad, were uneducated. My granddad taught himself how to read only because he was a tradesperson. So they both never went to school. When you grow up in such surroundings, you don't know any better. You just do what everybody else does. And
Mm.
in this village, all women were circumcised. So they don't even call it female genital mutilation. They call it female circumcision, which is absolute BS. Um, so mom experienced that, and it affected her entire life, both sexually and physical health problems, infections later in life. It was, yeah. Um, and because of the multiple doctors' visits and the problems, how I came to know about it, that it happened to mom, is it came to a point medically where it cannot be hidden anymore. Um,
Mhm.
so eventually, dad told us, the two boys, me and my brother, and then mom opened up. And as we became adults and at a much later age, we talked about it openly.
Mhm. Now, it's been criminalized in Egypt now, and there's been a lot of educational campaigns, and people that are really, really religious, they will still do it. And like you said, it's not being done obviously in any kind of sterile atmosphere. It's just some woman with a razor blade. Um, so some people are still, even though it's criminalized, they're still willing to take the chance because they believe that it's their religious duty to do this to their daughters. Do you have any idea if it has reduced significantly in the Christian community because of all of these education campaigns? Because they have no reason to take a risk and to do something that's criminalized.
There is good stats and bad stats. So, in the last 20 years, FGM in Egypt has been reduced significantly. When I say significantly, that still means a lot of people are
Yeah,
still
because
undergoing this procedure.
it was 90% or something ridiculous like
Yeah,
that. So, yeah.
yeah. So now I think it's down to like 45% or 50%. I cannot remember the exact number. However, the number that I remember clearly and I mentioned in my book, that even though it is criminalized, and fair enough, the religious people still want their daughters to have the procedure done. The problem is that 74% of the women undergone FGM, now it is being done by medical practitioners. So it is not done in the sense of the old style uneducated woman, as illegal and as a crime as it is. Medical practitioners and doctors still do it
They're willing to lose their
underground.
license.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
exactly. In the name of religion and in the name of Allah. I mean, the court can say whatever the court wants to say, but if a Rasul said that it was good, then it is good.
Yeah, exactly. Their their religious laws supersede any kind of secular laws as far as they're concerned.
And honestly, as eh, even though it is criminalized, any lawyer with a couple of $100 can get you out of this crime at
Oh,
court, because all you need is to say that the scriptures say XYZ, and we are a country that the constitution says that Islam is the source of legislation. Then you cannot argue that the judge has to let go.
that is exactly why feminists in Egypt that were trying so hard to get domestic violence criminalized were unsuccessful, and to get marital rape criminalized were unsuccessful because they always go back to these scriptures that say Allah or the Rasul said, Allah says you can beat your wife. It's right there in Quran, right? Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 34. It says it right here. How can you, some lowly human woman, come think that you're going to get us to agree to laws that are going to negate, what Allah has already given us the right to do? And it's the same thing with marital rape, right? We've got all these ahadith that are telling women that it's their duty, even if they're on top of a camel, if their husband wants them, then they have to let him, or all the angels are going to curse them. And so, how can you, after that, try to criminalize something that the religion has already made halal, has already made uh, not forbidden? I'm forgetting
Yeah.
English. You know, Allah has already allowed it. Who are you to disallow it? You know, it's already halal. Who are you to make it haram? So this, even though Egypt tries to sell itself as a secular country, and it actually is quite progressive in comparison to so many other countries around it, this having that in the Constitution just really cripples the society from progressing in any meaningful way because you're always going to just like a boomerang, right? You're going to just go right back to the source and say, well, this is what it says in the scriptures, so how can we progress if we're always using 1400-year-old books?
Exactly. Until you remove it from the Constitution, there is no way you can progress as a nation or you can elevate the justice system because you're
Mhm.
bound by these books.
Yeah. Now I can imagine, I mean that would be very frustrating for me. It's frustrating for a lot of liberal-minded, open-minded Muslim Egyptians. Obviously it's going to be frustrating for any atheist Egyptians out there. But I can imagine like as a Christian growing up too, like how extra frustrating that would be that you're being ruled by a religion that is not your own. And you, in your YouTube channel, you speak a lot about Islam. You're very knowledgeable about it. In fact, I thought you were an ex-Muslim when I first started watching your videos. Um, you know so much about this religion. Like, I was born and raised in Canada, which is a predominantly Christian country. I do not have that level of understanding or knowledge about Christianity. Like, I have just like the most nominal understanding of the religion. But you were forced, like all of this was like shoved down your throat, or did you take an interest in learning about it and understanding the people you were living amongst, or how did you get to know Islam so well?
Both. So, yes, on one hand, it was shoved down my throat from a very young age, as I said, but also it becomes a self-defense. When when you identify as a Christian and you're constantly under scrutiny, your faith is questioned by default, you're in the minority, you're ruled by Islamic legislation, you have to find something to defend yourself in a way. And back then, I took interest in studying a lot about the Quran and the Hadith. And throughout my teenage years, um, also happened that my uncle, who was living with us at when I was 10, had a Quran. So from that age, I took interest in reading the Quran by myself, just away from the school curriculum and just seeing what that book is all about. But I think by the age of 17, I read one of the major tafsir, um, al- Tafsir al-Tabari, I believe, at that time. Um, by the age, I think when I was 19 and I joined the Sunday school program. So now I left Sunday school as a child and I was preparing to be a Sunday school teacher. You have to go through a course, a 2 years course to prepare you to be a Sunday school teacher, and teach the Christian kids all about Christianity. During these 2 years study, there is something like a graduation project that you have to do. I took special interest in thesis استحالة تحريف الكتاب المقدس من داخل القرآن. The impossibility of the Bible to be corrupt according to Islamic narrative, according to the Quran. And that was a 2 year study that I did. Of course, I lacked a lot of critical thinking at the time because everything it was tinted glasses when I read anything Christian, but when I study the Quran and study the Islamic tradition, I was the sharpest critical thinker you can meet. You put me in Christian context, and that all disappears. Um, but yeah, I educated myself a lot about Islam to some extent, even more than about Christianity. So as I said, it was a self-defense. It wasn't until I came to Australia in my mid 30s that I finally put the same measure and I started really examining Christianity, my faith, with the same lens and with the same critical thinking. And I joined university and I did a degree in biblical studies. But that all came later in life. For the majority of my
Yeah.
life, I was studying and examining Islam,
Yeah.
ironically.
Interesting. So I find that really interesting because when you're born and raised in Cairo as a minority and you have to live, you're persecuted as a persecuted minority and you have to survive. I can imagine that looking at your own faith with such a critical eye would be a very dangerous thing to do. Like it would be uncomfortable for you because it means so much to be a part of this community and you don't want to rock that boat. You know what I mean? But when you're in Australia and you're disengaged from that persecuted minority status, and then you can sort of open your mind and start to critically analyze Christianity more objectively. So that's what I want to ask you about now. So tell us about your journey into doubt, let's call it.
It only started when I came to Australia. And there is interesting now, this is something I came to know recently. There is ton of research on this done that when you start living life using a new language, so I never talked in English before. Arabic was my mother tongue. Until I came to Australia, I started practicing English. And when you start living in a new language, in a new environment, all of a sudden you become much more rational. And that is, as I said, the research shows that. So this is one thing I by default became more rational and less emotionally invested in the same texts that I used to read in Arabic my whole life. Um, that's just one reason, but also the culture shock that happened to me when I came to Australia. Again, coming from Egypt, we only had Christians and Muslims. Even Jews had no existence in Egypt anymore. Coming to Australia and find an entire spectrum of Buddhists and Hindus and Sikh and Muslims and Christians and atheists and you name it, and it's here, and you live with them and you see these people day in, day out. And they were wonderful people. They were colleagues at work. They were my next door neighbor, and I couldn't see these people as bad or doomed to eternal damnation for whatever reason. From there, I started. So the doubt didn't take me immediately to dismiss my Christian faith. You go through a phase where, okay, hang on a second, you try to find a more tolerable version of the faith. So I started, well, maybe I shouldn't be Orthodox then, because the Uniting Church, for instance, they accept the LGBT. They don't necessarily say that other people from different faiths will go to hell. So I started exploring other Christian denominations or Christian interpretations of the faith. And from there, I went into a rabbit hole because then how do you tell if the Uniting Church's interpretation is better than the Orthodox? Well, the Orthodox is like the Salafi or the this. Should I go to the older school or to the more modern and tolerable school? And eventually, I couldn't find peace with what I was doing, so I decided to join a university in Australia and do a degree in textual criticism and biblical studies. That was for my own benefit, not for any career-driven study. I just wanted to come from a place of knowledge rather than a place of ignorance. And the more I studied, eventually I realized, hang on a second, all these books that we put so much faith in and we think that it is not questionable and we know the authors and we know how it was transmitted down to us, I realized that none of that really is logical or based on any true facts. it is all, it drills down to faith at the end of the day. And bit by bit, I lost my faith in the authority of the books themselves. And it took me a while until I openly declared myself agnostic. And then there
Mhm.
was a massive aftermath after that.
Oh, yeah? With like your family's reaction?
Family, I got a divorce. I was married at the time and I lost my marriage. My best friend, whom we came together from Egypt, it was a childhood friend that we came to Australia together. I remember the day I told him that I don't believe anymore. Basically, I was trying to soften the blow and tell him I've been doing this and I've been studying and I'm joining the university. And it's like, okay, cut the crap. Tell me, do you believe that Jesus Christ is Son of God or not? I'm like, well, I'm trying to tell you. And because I don't want to hear it, do you believe that he is God incarnate? And I said, to, to be honest, no. Immediately, he turned around, looked me in the eye, and said, okay, and I would like to maintain a distance from you. So please do not call me. And these, I swear, Yasmine, these are the last words I ever heard from him 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that to me sounds like an influence of Muslims. Like that's a cultural thing. That ended up coming from the intolerance of Muslims to other Muslims questioning or renouncing the faith. Because you don't usually hear stories like that from Christians anywhere else in the world unless they're from some fundamentalist, you know, like Jehovah's Witness or
Mm.
some sect, some specific sect.
Cult-like.
Um, exactly, exactly. But the general Christian people, especially those who are like part of the United Church, as you were mentioning, like they're so open-minded and relaxed about different things. And you wouldn't find people losing friendships, losing family. It's not very common here in North America anyway. But
Mm.
obviously that's to me, it sounds like it's a very Egyptian thing coming from the influence of Muslims. Would you agree with that or?
To some, to some degree, yes. Although it's probably very indirect influence. I would say that because of we grew up among Muslims and you see that dynamic, it also creates a very strong sense of identity. Once you really
You're right.
identify as a
Yeah.
Coptic Christian, it's almost like you cannot live without it. If you're gonna
Mm.
threaten this identity, I don't want to hear from you anymore. So
Hmm.
that's the zealot reaction that you get.
I can understand that. I can understand that very much because I hear that a lot from Jewish people. I hear that a lot from especially Jewish women who grew up in like Hasidic Jewish communities, where they were, there was a lot of misogyny. There's a lot of similarities between the way they grew up and the way I grew up. But because of there's so much anti-Semitism everywhere, because they are such a tiny minority globally, um, they will still have a, such a strong connection to the faith, even if they don't believe in the scriptures anymore, but they'll still have a very strong connection to just being a Jewish person. Um, because it just shaped who they are so much more because of the dynamics. So I can assume it's probably the same for you as a Coptic Christian. It's probably still a big part of who you are anyway, is it not? Like is it still a part
Absolutely.
of your identity? Yeah.
It is, absolutely. And this is why a lot of people tell me like when when I left the faith and I started doing the work that I do, they said, well, why wouldn't you remove the tattoo,
I was going
laser
to ask
removal?
you that. Yeah.
And it's because I'm proud of it. So regardless I identify with it or not, I don't believe in it anymore, but it is part of who I am. And if it wasn't for this cross, I wouldn't be here today with all of me. My thoughts, my entire journey started with that cross. So I'm still proud of it. I don't believe in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. I mean, that's nice. It's nice that you can have that um sort of foot in two different worlds and that you can live like that, that's acceptable, you know. Um, there is a man that I've been speaking to for years. His name is George. Of course, a lot of Christian Egyptians are named George. Um, and he's always been speaking to me about his experience, deconstructing after his realization that he didn't believe in the orthodox Coptic Christianity either. And he relayed to me a story once where he actually went to his priest and he told his priest everything, and he let out all of his frustration, sadness, anger, everything. And the priest was so kind in return. Like he was so understanding and loving and helped him heal in a really weird way, he never made him feel like a dirty heathen, get out of my church, like any of that kind of thing. And I just remember thinking, I didn't want to say this to him at the time because it would have been like diminishing the story he was telling me. But I was like, just imagine if a Muslim person went to an imam and was like, I got some problems. I want to talk to you about
Got some
like
problems
that.
with you.
Yeah, like that person would not leave the mosque alive. Like that is just like this is not this is totally chalk and cheese here, you know? Um, so I can understand how you would still feel connected to the culture and to the identity because you really are a very specific identity beyond the religion, right? Because I think, again, another thing that we need to talk more about is how the Coptic Christians in Egypt are the Egyptians, right? You
Yeah,
are the Egyptians. And just because the Muslims are the majority now, it kind of looks like they are the Egyptians, but they are the colonizers, right? They are the
yeah,
ones that are they're the Arabs. Um, Whereas because Coptic Christians stayed within their own communities, married within their own communities, um, they retained like some of these pictures are quite amazing, which I'm sure you've probably seen, where a Coptic person would have like a side profile compared to one of the pharaohs or something, and it's just uncanny. Like it's so clear that that is your lineage without any mixture of any Arabs coming through, and who knows if it was consensual or not, probably not, but a lot of babies being born and losing our Egyptian connection in the way that Coptics didn't lose it. Um, so yeah, that's something to be very proud of, and
good.
we should talk more about
I
that.
actually, because of what you just said, a few years ago, I was very curious and I went and I did the DNA test, ancestry DNA, and
Mhm.
I came to 83%, I think, indigenous Egyptian and 13% Ethiopian in me. So it
Wow.
was a very, very interesting stat.
That's really cool because that fits with the history anyway, because they all it was like a whole bunch of Africans, whether it was Sudan, Ethiopia, everywhere, they weren't called that at the time, but when the water started to dry up, they all came into Egypt because that's where the Nile was still there, and that's
Mhm.
how Egypt was established. So you're pretty much like you're so Egyptian, you're like pre-Egyptian. Like that's pretty
Pretty different.
cool. Yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're so
Yes.
like it didn't even that's pretty awesome. I when I did my 23andMe, I can't even remember what my Egyptian was. It was not that high, but I had my dad is from Palestine, so of course it's not going to be that high. And then, yeah, I just had a bunch. Mine was like a rainbow. I'm from all over the world, which is whatever country I go to, people speak to me in that language because they think I'm from there. So I'm just like ambiguous looking, I guess. But I think it's so cool, and I wish that I'd had more connection to ancient Egyptians. Because I got to tell you, and you know this because you've read my book or you heard my book on Audible. I had a real disdain for anything Egyptian for a long time because it reminded me of Arabs, which reminded me of Islam, and the whole thing just caused me PTSD and anxiety. And, I hated all of it. I wanted none of it in my life whatsoever. And so it's been a really positive journey for me to now recognize that Egyptians are not Arabs, and my people, my ancestors, my heritage are the ancient Egyptians. And I even went to Egypt last year and went to Luxor, Aswan, went to everywhere, right? Valley of the Kings, and just felt like I was going home. I really wanted to connect with what I choose to believe is my authentic ancestors, right? Um, and any of the others were colonizers that raped, pillaged, murdered, and forced us into their faith and forced their blood into my lineage, but they are not who I am.
Mhm.
And even learning about, which makes so much sense once you start to realize it, even learning about how the Egyptian language, we call it Arabic. It's not Arabic. It's so different from Arabic.
Right.
And I love that. I love seeing the shocking difference, not just the vocabulary, but the grammar as well, and realizing like, yes, it's a totally different language. Like you colonized us, but we still maintained our language. We lost a lot, and we have to thank the Coptic Christians for keeping a lot of the cultural aspects that we did have. Um, like kushari and things like that. Like we lost, what is the name of there's an Egyptian holiday that nobody else has in the Arab and Muslim world. It's like in the spring.
Not Shamanissim?
Yes,
Shamanissim?
Shem and Nassim. That's
Right.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because my mom would be like, that's pagans and that's not Muslims, and we don't celebrate that. But when I was in Egypt, we did. So, but I love all of these like pre-Islamic aspects of Egypt because it makes me love that part of myself again, makes me love that part of my heritage. The part that they told us was the days of ignorance. Um, because it's pre-Islam. It's exact opposite. In fact, those were the days of knowledge and light, and the days of ignorance started after that. And it's really hard to see the dichotomy, like to be in these temples and to be seeing like medicine, politics, literature, like everything. Humanity started in Egypt. And then you
Feminism.
walk yeah, that's right. And then you walk out of those temples and it's like modern Egypt. And it's like, oh my God, what a
Take me
shocking,
back.
yes. How could you let this happen? Um, but anyway, I'm just ranting and raving because I think it's so cool that you still have such a connection to Egypt. And I wish I had a stronger like DNA connection, but in my soul, in my spirit, in my heart, that's where my people are from.
It is where you dig your roots and you
Yeah.
choose your roots. So, speaking of language, do you know that the Coptic language that
Yes.
they use still in the prayer is the ancient Egyptian language that the pharaohs used to speak? Yeah.
Yes, and I blew my mind. Blew my mind. I was watching it was music actually. They were singing in a theater. There was a concert where they were singing a song that was using the Coptic Christian, using the language that you use in the churches, I think.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and because all we have, of course, is hieroglyphics, so we know we can read it, but we don't have no idea of what it sounded like. But what this musician did was they envisioned what it could have sounded like. And it was absolutely hauntingly beautiful. I'll share it with you if you're interested. But
Yes,
yeah,
yes, please.
it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Here's a quick trivia for you. إشليل هي جن prophetess. This is Coptic. This is ancient Egyptian. But ironically, do you have a guess what I just said in Coptic language? إشليل
No,
هي
but
جن
it sounded
prophetess.
really Hebrew to me.
Right? Yeah, it's very close. And
Yeah.
basically, it's صلي على النبي in
No
Coptic.
way. That had to be the one that you came with, Adam. That had to
Because
be
it's
the one you
ironic.
said. Out of all of the things that you could have chosen.
You could have said something beautiful, for God's sake.
So everybody, that kind of means like pray for the prophet, like bless the prophet kind of thing. So yeah, very unfortunate choice. But say it again. Let me hear if I can hear any kind of anything familiar.
That's three words. إشليل, إشليل, which means pray. Hijain, which is upon. A prophetess, which is very close to prophet. A
Oh,
prophetess.
wow. Okay, yeah, it doesn't sound anything like Arabic whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to everyone that is here who might have questions or comments for you. Let's start with you, Sarah.
Hi, Yasmin. Hi, Adam. It's
Hi,
very
Sarah.
nice to talk to you finally. I have a funny story for Yasmin because she mentioned my favorite verse, which I absolutely adore and love. And then I have a question for Adam. Apparently, I created that verse, Nisa 34, and it's fake and it doesn't exist in
Oh,
Quran because I put something on Instagram. I always fight about these things. White women come back at me and they tell me that it doesn't exist in their Quran, and I don't know what that means. Somebody with an Arabic sounding name told me today that it's a fake verse. It doesn't exist. You just put it there, and I'm going to blast your picture everywhere. So people will go, like, I'm getting threatened on a post that I'm talking about violence against women in Islam. But I made that verse, so I take responsibility. I apologize. It's just, I didn't know how to deal with that. So I thought I have to tell you, I can't wait for later. So, Adam, I have a question for you. You talk about Islam, and Yasmin is not the only one who's very surprised because I watched your videos. I'm like, this man knows so much about Islam. And for me, that's normal. Okay, we are ex-Muslims. We talk about it because our lives depend on it. If we don't talk about it, we get murdered. That's why we fight back. And then I realized, wait, he's not Muslim. He's not an ex-Muslim. It was mind-blowing that you are actually a Coptic Christian and coming from Egypt. And like, I could not fathom why you care so much. I still don't understand why you care so much. You could just go live your life. I want to know why you care. Why? And I appreciate that. Don't get me wrong. Like, I appreciate your videos to no end because you are very detailed. And as Yasmin said, it's just so much knowledge and it's very factual. And there's no way anybody can tell you, you faked this thing and you wrote it because you have actual proof that this is where it comes from. And look at this. And it's like, they can't come at you like that. So why do you actually care? You could just go ahead and live a happy life and just do whatever you want to do in Australia, land of the free. Why are you standing with us? And how can we duplicate that and triplicate that, have other people care that much? Thank you for all you do. And thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a very long answer, so bear with me for a moment here, because I'm assuming that you're talking about the English channel. I do have two channels. The main one I started about 8-9 years ago was in Arabic, and it focuses on both Christianity and Islam, almost equally. Um, but then after doing this work for about 8 years, I realized that so before coming to the English one, the reason I started doing this in Arabic is I realized that there was hardly anyone criticizing Christianity from an academic perspective in the Arabic sphere. And that's what I wanted to start with. Once I did that, Muslims started coming to the Arabic channel and they say, Allahu Akbar, someone is pulling
Yeah.
Christianity apart. Like, okay, hang on a second.
And now it's
That's
your turn.
yeah. So I started making material on Islam to make my stand clear that I'm against all religions or all beliefs in general, not just Christianity. Um, Back and forth, the Arabic channel grew, and then eventually that led me to realize the opposite is true in the Western world. There's a lot of people like Bart Ehrman and all these Christian scholars, biblical scholars that criticize Christianity, but there's hardly any Islamic criticism in English. And when there is, it is not necessarily coming from an Arabic speaker. So you get the cop out, the usual, you don't understand the verse, you don't speak Arabic, so you're misinterpreting Quran. So I felt like there is a huge urge and need for someone who is a native Arabic speaker who also understands a great deal of the Quran and Islam um, and by that point I also finished my degree so I could put all what I learned in textual criticism in general. Although I learned that on biblical narratives, once you have the tools, you have the tools. You can apply it on any ancient literature. So I started applying that on the Quran with my Arabic speaking knowledge and made the channel in English. So that's how it came to be. Why I did it in English is because it is scary when people keep thinking about, well, Islam is the fastest growing religion. By 2060, Islam will be the most dominant religion in Canada. The Islam is spreading in Europe, blah, blah, blah. The last thing I want really is to wake up one morning to see that because we're living in the Western world, we're living in democratic systems. When Islam is going to spread to that level, it can easily control the legislation. And I don't want to see the secular societies that we finally established being infiltrated by religious beliefs once again. And the worst of all, Islam. And next morning, women has to cover up, or you cannot buy alcohol anymore, or you know what, you cannot eat bacon anymore. It's haram, and all the things that we fought for centuries to separate church from the state, Islam will take over. So this is why I felt like in the Western world, we really need some strong Islamic criticism before it's too late.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that there is a toxic mix of arrogance and ignorance in the West. There's that famous video that I'm sure you saw with Gamal Abdel Nasser when he was in Parliament, and he was talking about Ikhwan want me, the Muslim Brotherhood want me to tell all the women in Egypt to wear hijab, and then they all started laughing, ha 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 ha, you know, and he says, and then I said back to him, like, you put a scarf on your daughter's head, like you can't even get your one daughter to wear a scarf, and you want me to get all of the Egyptian women to wear a scarf. And they all laughed because it was so funny. Just the thought of Egyptian women in hijab was just like a big joke to all these men, right? Like there's no way that could ever happen. And now look at our country today, right? Obviously, Sarah's from Iran. Iran has a very similar story. You know, we have seen this happen, and so we know it's possible. But here in the West, they truly don't get it. They don't get it. They've never experienced it. They don't believe that it could possibly be true. You talked about them being a majority in Canada and then changing the public policy, education, media, government, everything. They don't even have to wait until they're a majority before they start to do that, right? They're always in that direction. And as soon as they get any kind of momentum, look at America. Can I just mention? In America, they're like, what, 1%? But you will hear the adhan in the streets of many cities across the United States of America. 1%, right? But they're working hard. And so if by the time they get to be a majority, forget it. Just give up at that point. Like that's it. Just get out of the country or, or convert. Those are your choices. Or, there's no future for you if they become a majority.
This is why I love your tagline of your book, Yasmine, how Western
mhm.
liberals are empowering radical Islam. I'm sorry if I butchered the line,
No, no,
but
no. That's right.
something across that. Yeah, right. So yeah, I believe the West need to be educated on, well, stop turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
The world need to be educated on these things.
Yeah, you're right. And like, yet it was just a blind eye. It's not just a blind eye. They're in the streets actually supporting them, like full on, right? So it's a blind eye would actually be an improvement. David, go ahead.
Right. Firstly, I'd like to give a plug. So, Adam, are you in? Do you live in Australia?
I am in Australia, yes.
Which part, roughly?
But
I'm
forgive me,
I'm in
I keep
Melbourne.
that private.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Right.
I try
Critics
to
of
keep that
Islam
private.
don't.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Of
okay.
course.
The reason I'm okay. It's actually hard. Anyway, you may know there's a Egyptian exhibition um, at the National Gallery of Victoria at the moment.
Right.
Right. So even if you can't visit it physically, I'll put the link in the chat for a virtual tour. If you want to visit a Egyptian temple setup, so to speak, there's a and then all sorts of great stuff. I was there with one of my children Friday of last week. It was most wonderful. So that's just a plug. Now more practically, I've done a study of comparing part of the Bible and the Quran. Unfortunately, Yasmine's not interested, but try to show where the Quran has been greatly to the disadvantage. Basically, if you look at them, these parts as not as fact but as stories, which shape character. The Bible version, I'm talking about the Joseph story, and one of the David and Nathan stories. They shape character positively, whereas the Quran version is lacking. And this goes a quite a long way to explain the difficulties of a Muslim society. So I thought I'd appreciate if I could send you. It's about 10, 15 pages, I think. It's not too hard. And I'd be very interested if you have a comment on them.
Sure,
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So and well, the last thing is I'm doing something. I'm writing a book on ethics, and with the idea that in the Bible and all these texts, there can be good stuff if you look at it as a resource to be mined, not as an authority to thump on you. If you see what I mean. So if you take it as it may have good ideas, and as a mixture of good ideas and bad ideas, and then you sort through and find the good ideas. Oh, that's what I've been trying to do. And there's a little book I went on, some writings of St. Paul. From a Christian point of view, it's a problem because, of course, the Christians want to say Jesus was the main thinker. But I'm saying, no, it's St. Paul. So they've got a sort of problem because they can't say St. Paul was no good, but they also can't say he's as good as I say he was. So they're sort of caught. That's the idea. I don't know if what I said. Can you hear what I'm saying? I know my voice is a bit weak.
I could hear some of it, but not all of it, to be honest. I
Right.
missed a couple of things, but I got the gist of what you said.
Yeah. Anyway, if you feel comfortable, if it's me sending an email to you somehow, or I could send it in the chat, whatever you like.
I hope Yasmine will share my credentials when this video is published, and feel free to reach out to me, and my website will be, I guess, available in the description.
Right. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, David. Ari, you're next.
Hi, Yasmine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. I really love your work and appreciate everything you do. Um, my father's family are Baghdadi Jews and Atasharaf, and um, I studied Middle Eastern Studies at Berkeley, and actually did my thesis on the Coptic situation. Um, and It was at the time, that was 94, and it was very hard to find a lot of information. And I actually went to the Egyptian consulate to get some information from them. And so they were able to get a lot of newspaper clippings for me, which I had some help translating. And but even in the books that we had, there were like books from 1956, on the Coptic situation. Then it was very hard to find anything. Um, and so, but basically, I I put together this thesis, but still there were so many gaps in my knowledge of what the situation really was. And of course, also I've been informed by my own family's experience. So um, and speaking and conversing with some Egyptian Jews as well. And I was wondering, I know that the Christians in across the Middle East and North Africa, they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. I speak to a lot of mainly Lebanese Christians. I have friends, um, and I know that they have to present themselves as part of the Arab world. But if you speak to them in private, they will say, like they would say, well, we're Phoenicians, we're not Arabs. In Lebanon, they will say that. Um, but they have to present that they're very much part of this same culture, and they stand together and so forth. Um, but I was wondering, like in the case of Egypt, when Nasser began expelling the Jews from Egypt in the 50s and so forth, did the Copts view that as something like kind of who we kind of dodged a bullet and we're safe now, because we're part of this same culture, or did they see this as kind of the beginning of their end as well? There.
Great question.
I'll let you answer that first,
Me?
Yasmine.
No, you go
Was
ahead.
it for you or for me?
Yes, no, everything's for you. This is your this is your podcast.
All right. My knowledge might be limited on this, but I will give you my 2 cents worth. My understanding is that from even before Nasser, if you go back in history to the times of Carolus Amud I don't know, Cyril, Saint Cyril, I don't know. It was in the 4th century, I think. And there was these massive fights between the Christians and the Jews at the time, and they kicked the Jews out of Alexandria. And it was horrible. But the way I understand, this is the same incident that eventually led to the killing of Hypatia, the Greek philosopher. My understanding is that the Christians at that time, before the dominance of Islam, they still treated themselves as the original owners of the land. They are the Egyptians of Egypt, and the Jews didn't belong here. There are these strong ties between the Coptic Christians being from the land of Egypt and the Jews being from the land of Israel. And it was kind of the ethnicities at the time was kind of clear. And if you fast forward that to Nasser's time, I think that the Christians still maintained that mentality. Yeah, they are kicking the Jews out of Egypt. Nasser is kicking the Jews out of Egypt to wherever, to their land or to the diaspora. But we are the Christians of Egypt, so we're staying. I don't think that the Christians feared for their own kickouts at the time. Maybe they feared for their own persecution. Of course, they're suffering in a dominant Muslim country, but I didn't think that they saw that as their end, or once the Jews are out, they are next. I think they still maintained their feet in the land to some extent. But again, that's a personal opinion. I cannot say that this is backed by resources or anything. It's my reading through the historical narrative.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me as well, for what it's worth. And I think it was probably the same for Christians in Iraq, like where your family was living, or Christians anywhere else in the Middle East and North Africa, because they would be feeling like if they were to speak up for the Jewish people, would be getting themselves in trouble too. So they
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm just extending the most charitable assumption here that even if they did feel uncomfortable with what was happening to Jewish people, they would keep that to themselves because they wouldn't want to be next. I think Egyptians have a specific kind of claim to the land in a way that the other Christians don't throughout the Middle East. So maybe they had less of a fear. But I think that was definitely probably not definitely, probably true for Christian people throughout the rest of the Middle East.
Yeah, I know also that it's probably a very different situation, since I think at the time in the 50s, the Copts still were about 20% of the Egyptian population. So it was a huge minority as of compared to the Jews. So I think they still felt they may have had some political power, even if they didn't have any kind of military power at that point, or ability to defend themselves. Yeah, even researching it was very difficult to try and find answers on these things.
Yeah, and you might be familiar with Bridget Gabriel, who's a Christian Lebanese woman who talks about her experience. Because even when they were 50-50 in Lebanon, Christian people still didn't feel empowered in that country. And you talk about having a lot of Lebanese Christian friends. After October 7th, I would say Lebanese Christian people have disappointed me more than anybody else. I expect that kind of mindless tribal support from indoctrinated Muslims who are told that you're a part of the Ummah and you have to support Muslims regardless, even when they're the terrorists. But I found it so jarring how there were so many Christians like Christian Lebanese people that were part of my life that, as far as I'm concerned, they are self-hating. Like you really believe that your allegiance to this tribe or to these people or to this group is going to save you. Like it was sad and very frustrating for me to see that they couldn't recognize in this very clear scenario that they have been. Look at the Christians all over the Middle East and North Africa. This isn't even, and in Lebanon, like in your own country, look how you've been treated. And so for them to like immediately jump to defending and actually supporting Hamas was quite shocking for me. Because yeah.
I guess I was fortunate that my friends, most of them, uh, didn't share that view. That they're very critical of what happens in the Middle East in general. But I've seen the other side, so I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. Yeah, but I guess in the case of the Lebanese Christians, many of them have relatives in Palestine, so there may be other motivations there as well. I'm not sure about the Coptic Christians in Egypt and how they feel about Gaza. It may be a different situation as well there.
Yeah, I think that with the Lebanese people, I can say with pretty firm authority that it's more about wanting to hate Israel and Jewish people than it is about loving Palestinians, because the Lebanese actually treat Palestinians like garbage in their home country. They
Yeah.
like when Palestinians are in Lebanon, they're treated very badly. And they're very bigoted towards them. So it's not a love for Palestinians, it's not a love for Gazans. It's a hate for Jews and a hate for Israel. I think that definitely unites them, right? They have that shared hate. So that's what keeps them bonded. I don't know what it is. What is it in Egypt these days? Because I'd love to get your perspective on this, Adam. So after October 7th, let's talk specifically about the Coptic Christian community. Do you have any kind of sense of what they're feeling or what they're saying, or where are they
I
standing?
don't.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I wish I knew what the Coptic Christians think about these, but also to be honest, because I'm remote, because I'm not living in Egypt, I wouldn't even trust what appears on the social media, my Facebook, even if I have some Coptic Christians, because in a lot of cases, when I was living in Egypt, you find the Coptic Church trying to tell Christians what to believe or what to portray because we don't want to piss off the majority in the country. So if the majority in the country is taking a particular stand, you will hardly see the Coptic Christians taking an opposing stand. They will either remain silent or they will maintain the same views. That's my understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are we good, Avi? Or Ari? Can I move on? Okay. All right. So we've got a question here from Aisha. She says, I wanted to ask, is your passion for your work raising awareness about restrictive beliefs, specifically in Islam, influenced by your personal relationship with Muslims while growing up in Egypt? So similar to Sarah's question, I think.
Yeah, but I don't think it is necessarily related to my relationship with Muslims as people. It's more about the coercive control that comes from within the text itself, rather than the actual people. Um, so, yeah, it's the
Yeah,
dogma itself. It's the belief system rather than the people.
yeah, yeah. Then I love that you said that, and I appreciate that you said that, because Egyptian people are actually quite cool. They're really fun and hilarious, and yeah, just like really great people, but they are being like you said, it's coercive control, right? They're being controlled by this ideology that hurts them first and foremost before anybody else. But that's the same,
Muslims are victims to start with.
yeah, the first victims of Islam, yeah. And I'd say the same is true across all Muslim majority countries. Okay, so Adam, before I let you go, I just want to make sure that you've said everything that you wanted to say, that you maybe have some parting words for us, some words of advice. Just wanted to give you the floor to conclude our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't really have much to say at the end. It's been a pleasure being here. I appreciate the conversation and the questions from you and from the audience. Um, I hope that you will have a chance to add my credentials or my YouTube channels. My book, Wounded by Faith, will be available by the end of September or early October. But other than that, please, everyone, feel free to reach out, whether through the website or through my channel. I would love to hear from you. And Yasmine, thank you so much for the opportunity.
My absolute pleasure, Adam. So everyone, you can look up Adam Elmasri on YouTube and watch his English videos. You will not be disappointed. He has really great videos. And in fact, he's got a little plaque behind him there from YouTube proving to you all that he's an amazing YouTuber. So thank you so much, Adam. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.